And hello, everybody. This is Ray Hanania with my co-host Bill Lipinski, the former congressman here at Two Guys on Politics. It is Saturday, April 18, 2026, and this is season 5, episode 13, broadcast on the U.S. Arab Radio Network on WNZK AM 690 radio, as well as on YouTube at twoguysonpolitics.com. Today, in today's discussion, we're going to talk about, of course, the war in Iran, ceasefire updates, the role of Europe and France and England coming to the Straits of Hormuz, the impact that it's had on oil. We'll also talk about the Israel and Lebanon war, the role of violence and organizations like Hezbollah. We're going to then also talk a little bit about, during the second segment, about Trump's fight with Pope Leo, what's happening with that. Should the Pope engage in politics like that? Then we're going to talk about some interesting things like Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who gave a prayer in explanation in discussing the recovery of the once airman who was lost in Iran. They found him, they recovered him, and then he read a prayer that he said came from the Bible, but in fact, that prayer actually came from a movie called Pulp Fiction, which is way out of line. And anybody who saw the movie had to be laughing, as I did, as I heard it. And then we're going to talk, if we have time, about the Adam Toledo case. And not specifically about the case of this 12-year-old kid, but about how parental responsibility is often pushed aside and kids commit crimes, have weapons, and when they get in conflict with the police and maybe are killed, as this one child unfortunately was killed, they blame the police. They blame the effort to fight crime, but nobody holds the parents responsible. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back right after these messages. I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is Two Guys on Politics. And the next voice you hear really should have been a singer because his voice is better than Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Perry Como, or Elvis Presley. Mr.
Barry
Ray Hanania.
Barry Como. I grew up listening to his song. I think it was Rings. He had a song about rings that, as a child, I remember singing that as a little
He was,
kid.
he was a very successful singer.
Oh yeah, no, I know he was phenomenal. He had a great influence, and that was Bill. That was a better time in
Yes,
the
it was.
world. It
Absolutely.
was a much better time. People were kinder. People were more considerate. People were more willing to give somebody the benefit of the doubt to avoid conflict. Seems like today we go out of our way to gin up the conflict, make it worse. I mean, I get that feeling because every day there's like a new conflict and a new problem and prices. It just seems terrible.
Well,
So,
it sells though, Ray. People make money off of all of it. You know that as well as I do.
yes.
That's why
Yeah,
people gin it up, unfortunately. Let me ask you a question. Of
sure.
Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Perry Como, what did they all have in common besides being singers?
They were Italian.
Very good. Very good. I'm proud of you. Okay.
Barry Como, I thought. Yeah, I knew. He was the only question I had. I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure he was Italian. But yeah, Dean Martin, what he was phenomenal. And of course, so was Sinatra. Those are great singers. But there were always those rumors about Sinatra, right? That he was friends with the mob. But just being friends with the mob, I mean, you live in an area where mobsters live, you're going to know some mobsters, right?
Right. Right.
Can
He
you?
grew up with the mobsters.
Yeah, and they became mobsters.
Yep.
It didn't mean that he supported their crimes, but he may have had some sympathy because of friendships and stuff like that. But that didn't make him a criminal. But those are long gone days, Bill. And look at what we have today. I don't know if you had a choice between today and 50 years ago, the atmosphere of what was going on, which would you choose? Do you
Oh,
think?
I'd probably choose 50 years ago since I'd be 50 years younger.
I would too. You know, it was my birthday, by the way. I just turned 73, 73
When
times
when was
around the sun.
when was
Uh,
your birthday?
Yesterday,
Oh my
on
heavens!
yeah,
Happy
on
birthday to you.
Friday the 17th. Yes.
Okay.
Time flies when you're having fun, Bill. What are you going to do? And are we having fun yet in Iran? What's the status with Iran? I mean, it keeps one day we have peace, one day we have conflict, one day we have certainty, the next day we have uncertainty. Well, from your perspective, what's going on with Iran?
I don't think I really know anymore. I used to think I knew what was going on, but I seriously question that I do anymore because as you just said, one day Trump tells us peace in our time, okay? Everything will be fine in a day or two. In a day or two, he's saying we're going to bomb them into the Stone Age because we're not progressing. Then he wants to cut off the ceasefire because he says they're not living up to it. And then they say, we're not living up to it. They open up the straits. We move in our boats, our warships. We don't really do anything other than stand there and watch what's going on. And then they decide to close the straits. I, I, I am, Trump has got me with his chaos and confusion. I don't really know what's going on there any longer. I will tell you this, though. If we don't get rid of the regime, I'm going to say this whole thing was a very, very big mistake. And I've been one of the few people that I know that has supported this war from the beginning. But as I say, it's it's dragging on too long. I don't really know what Trump wants anymore. We talk about giving them $20 billion so we can take the enriched uranium out. Uh, and it sounds like that's going to be part of the deal. Then the Iranians came out and said, we don't agree with that. Maybe it's negotiating tactics on both parts. Maybe they're trying to confuse each other. I don't know. But perhaps you can shed some real light on this subject.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm like you, Bill. Honestly, I disagree. You know, the Iranians are not the regime there is not the best. They're horrible. The way they treat their people, they definitely are terrible. But you know, I mean, you and I we haggle about this, but it isn't about the fact that they're good people. I don't argue that they're good people at all. You know, I grew up in a situation where my dad served during World War II. He came out and he believed that people had to respect the law. And if you broke the law, you could have been the best person in the world, but you were still a criminal. And he always had that principle about, supporting people and not supporting people based on a rule of law that was applied across the board to everybody, where there weren't exceptions. And I think the first time I saw a problem with that was during the Vietnam War, um, when we had that Lieutenant Calley, who led his soldiers, American soldiers, into a Vietnamese village and massacred, the civilians that were living there.
Eli,
My Lai, that's right, the My Lai massacre. And there was this big debate about, well, he's an American, those were commies, well, they said they were commies, but we didn't know anything about the people who were murdered. We were just labeled them. But I thought we were in Vietnam to save those people from the commies, the Chinese and the Soviets who were trying to take over and destroy not just them, but us as America. So sometimes I think we lose sight of that. And I know you and I go back and forth a couple times on this, but I know deep down there's a foundation about the rule of law that should be applied. And
well, Kelly was he was brought to trial for that. He
it
was
took
convicted,
forever.
he was
Yes,
convicted for that. He went to
yes. He
prison
almost
for it. I don't know for how long, but I mean, justice was done. Well, I don't know if justice was done. I think they killed 130 people in that village. And I think originally they blamed it on the commies, but it
right.
did turn out actually to be, Americans underneath his command. Well, that Vietnam War, though, Ray, was such a quagmire, such a
We couldn't win it. It
the
was so hard.
Americans had no idea what they were fighting for over there whatsoever. And many of them really deteriorated so badly because of the smoking of marijuana and
And
a few
drugs.
things at the time. Now it's not a bright page in the history of America. We went there for a good reason, stop the spread of communism. But the people who we were fighting for, they were as bad as the communists. That's where we get ourselves into trouble. When we go in and choose a side that oftentimes is a civil war, and we choose a side that we think is good, they turn out to be almost as bad, if not worse, than the people we're actually fighting against. We got to be more selective in the things that we would do. And that's what Trump talked about during the campaign. He was not going to get involved in these foreign wars.
Right.
Fortunately, that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the big disappointment is Trump. And you and I, what he does, he's like a magician. He steps in, brings chaos and hypocrisy and violations of the law. He's a criminal. The guy was indicted and almost and charged with 34 crimes himself. But he drags us in and gets us to fight about issues that have nothing to do with the actual facts of what he's been doing. He has created more chaos in this world. He promised us to focus on the economy. He promised us that he was going to make America first. He was going to say America first. That was the priority. And if he had done that, we wouldn't be fighting these wars, all over. There wouldn't be these 8 wars that he starts. He starts a war or works with another country ally to start a war. And then he works to end the war and he says, I brought peace in our time. And I'm thinking, no, you've disrupted everything and the prices go up. The economy is a disaster. And he says, well, don't worry, the prices are going to go down. Yeah, they'll go down, but they went up $2. Gasoline went up $2. And just because it goes down 20 cents is not the same as bringing it down. It's still up. But he plays these games, he turns it into politics. He focuses on the incidentals, of saying, oh, these people are terrorists, they're bad people, they're Muslims, or they're, he turns to this Islamophobia sometimes. And then he steps back and says, oh, no, I'm not doing that. This guy is a manipulator. He's a shyster. We put him in office. I don't understand how we have allowed him to take control of our country. It's not even the issue of Iran or Israel or Lebanon or Russia and Ukraine. It's not even NATO. It's about a guy who is playing us and he's convinced us to fight with each other about these facts that he throws out that we don't even know if they're true. And we miss the bigger picture that he's the problem. And I don't know what we can do about it.
Well, I think it's terrible that we don't know if we should believe the spokesperson for the Ayatollah or we should believe the President of the United States.
Well, it's not that, Bill. It's
Well,
not that.
it is that, Ray.
No, it's the spokesperson for the government of Israel versus the spokesperson of the Ayatollah. And we get dragged into that fight.
Well, we've been in that fight on the side of Israel, Ray, since 1948. You know that as well as I. And we're going to continue to be on that side. But I don't really hear Bibi Netanyahu saying that much. I do have the leaders of Iran telling us one thing, and the leader of the United States telling us another thing. And the point I'm making is, in this day and age, I don't know what side to believe, which is terrible to say.
Well, I mean, I
That's
agree with you with that. I agree with you on that. I don't know which side to believe either.
no.
But I think sometimes we kind of protect certain sides because we don't want to get into it. But
Well,
I
I
agree
think
with
that's
you.
true. that is true. Trump is just oh, all I can
Yeah,
say is I'm thankful that I never voted for him. I never will vote for him. And I hope that the Democrats take control, at least the House and the Senate, in the midterm elections, so there'll really be a check and balance on him. But it won't shut his mouth. He won't be any less inflammatory when he talks. And that may be the worst part about this guy, the things that he says about other countries, other people. He certainly is not winning any friends for the United States of America. Whoever follows him is going to have to do a hell of a job rebuilding our reputation with countries around the world.
yeah. I mean, listen, if we forget about the Middle East for a
Right.
moment, we have not done anything with Ukraine. And to me, the war between Russia and Ukraine is so much more of a threat to us because it undermines the very structure that we put together after World War II to put the commies in check. Communism is the ultimate threat. The communists have gone into the Middle East, taken advantage of things, pushed governments, used governments. But if it wasn't for the communists, the Middle East would have been a whole different area. So to me, the real problem is we're not really addressing communism. And I really believe he has a friendship with Putin that's driven by money and greed, and that he is protecting that. And because he's protecting that, the very principle that we need to rely on to resolve these problems between Israel and Iran and how we get dragged into all this stuff in the Middle East, they get pushed aside. We don't get to really do what needs to be done. I'm worried about NATO. NATO was the most important thing we ever did, not just to protect and do the European countries a favor, but to protect us. Can you imagine if all the European countries were communist today? And if we didn't do that, where would we be? So we need them more than they need us, because if they don't exist, we're in trouble.
Well, that's another debate for another day. But let me say this to you. Maybe you know this. I think it would be very interesting for us to do a program on how these countries in the Middle East came to be, after the First World War, how France and England and the United States was part of it.
Right,
We really
right.
didn't say anything at all about it.
That's
We were
true.
only interested in Europe. But those France and England put together those countries in the Middle East. I would like to know how they determined, you know, what land belonged to what country and so forth. I think that would be something very interesting that I think our listeners would want to hear about. How was it that Saudi Arabia, who happened to be very friendly with the British at the time, wound up getting the land with all that oil? It's incredible, you know.
Well, it's actually, I mean, that's the interesting thing. We don't have, our history is not, sometimes it's not truthful. The Saudi Arabians have been in Saudi Arabia for years. I mean, just to use them, and in all fairness, I write for a Saudi newspaper.
I don't, well, I'm
So,
not,
no, I know that, but I like to just make sure people know that I'm not trying to hide anything.
oh, right.
So, doing that gives me a little bit of knowledge, and I wouldn't write or associate with somebody I didn't agree with or I had a real principal problem with. But it's their land. It was their land, and the West after World War One came in and created these boundaries,
Right.
and then sent in companies because they discovered oil, and they said, "Hey, we need to take that oil. These Middle Eastern countries don't need the oil because they're not even close to our industry level. So we need the oil." But instead of working with the local country, I mean, we go to your backyard, Bill. I set up an oil company in your backyard. I take all the oil, I take all the profits, and I basically pick one member of your family and say, okay, we're going to give you some money. But the rest of them, they have to live, and you say, okay, they'll live like poverty, in poverty. We go in there, exploit it, we take all the money. And then at some point, that country wakes up and says, wait a minute, this is our oil. We don't go to the United States to the Virginia mountains and take the coal and then take all the money and then sell the coal so we profit in the Middle East. That's an American asset. So they get upset, they start fighting. The oil companies are not like governments. They don't live by democracy or principles. It's all about the bottom line and money. So they control everything and they
How
fight and then
many,
they
how many
put
American oil companies were operated in the Middle East in the 1920s? Do you know?
no, but it was in the 1930s and 40s where they started to actually get in there. And there were some big companies. All these companies were American companies and
They were
some
all
and
American
British
companies?
companies and British and some European countries.
Yes.
And it was all about profit. And they were making money hand over fist. And the irony about all this is oil comes from the Middle East, but if you want gasoline, which comes from oil, it costs twice as much to buy in the Middle East than it does here in the US. Our gasoline prices were at $2.40 when Trump came in. I take pictures, it's a bad habit I have today. Every time I go to a gas station, I take a picture of the prices, the three prices, the basic, the middle, and the high octane, because I want to see on my camera the change of these prices. And I've only been doing that because I realize that the government lies to us about the price of gasoline and the costs and the taxes and everything. But the price of gasoline was so low for us. But when you go to the European countries and the Middle East, the price of gasoline is very, very high.
Yeah, but that's
And
the
that,
taxes that the countries put on it. Isn't that the reason for the significant difference in price?
no, it's the companies that bring the oil and sell it cheaper to us because they're American or Western companies. And they increase the cost to these countries where they get the oil from and sell it back to them. The Saudis then and these oil companies decided, they formed OPEC, the oil producing organization, to take back control of this. And, then we get caught up in fighting. We don't look at the history of, how we tried to these are robber barons in these companies. I don't like the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers were American. But do you think that they did everything because they wanted to make America great, or they wanted to make their bank account bigger and stronger, and they wanted to be richer? Those people were robber barons, robbing from the American people as much as they were from other people. And sure, Rockefeller gave out a silver dime every time he would see a poor person, and that was the PR spin. They said, "Oh, look at Rockefeller! What a great guy he
He
is."
also built the University of Chicago. Do you know that?
Yeah, from the money that he took from you and me and everybody. I don't like this thing where governments they steal money and they take 5% of their greed and they do something good with it. That's called PR spin, Bill. I was raised in public relations in the news media, and I know that a crook can make himself look good by taking 2 cents and giving it to the poor and promoting that while concealing the theft.
I, I,
That's
reg-
what's happened.
I regret that I asked the question about how these countries were formed
But
after
you shouldn't
the
regret
war.
that, Bill. You raised a good point. You
I
raised a
raised a
good
good
point.
point, and I still would like to know why some countries got all the oil, other countries got nothing but dust and sand.
It's
And
geography. It's the
how did the
world.
French and English decide who got what? Because they are the ones that did it. I mean, I saw Lawrence of Arabia. I know how what he did over there. I know
Right.
what he did after the war attempt. I mean, he was a real guy, Lawrence of Arabia.
Right. He tried to do the right thing. You're
Yes,
right.
he did. Absolutely.
And he hit a wall with
Go
both
ahead.
sides with his no, but he hit a wall with his government, the British, and he
Yes.
hit a wall with the Arabs. And he was frustrated by both because they both were doing the opposite of what he believed. And I studied Lawrence of Arabia, and I read all the books about him. He was a decent person. I mean, he tried to do the right thing. but he was between a rock and a hard place. And that's, I think, where we're at today. We're between a rock and a hard place. And it's easy to take sides. It's hard to be Lawrence of Arabia. It's hard to be the guy in the middle and do the right thing. It's really difficult to do. And we get caught up fighting about these side issues, what happened yesterday or what happened 5 weeks ago, instead of looking at the bigger principle that drives this stuff. It all comes down to money, greed, and power. And I think that's what is driving Trump. Now, the only hope I have with Trump, though, and we both, I think, agree, is that he's going to lose control of the House and probably the Senate because of this. But isn't he desperately trying to change things because
Sure
he
he
thinks
is.
he can reverse that, right?
Yes, he does.
And
I don't
but
think he can.
I don't think he can either. The American people can't be that stupid, right? There
Well,
are some that are.
I've told you, I've talked to, maybe now 65, 70 people about the war. Uh, and other than maybe 4 or 5 people, I was one of them that was for the war. Everybody else was opposed to the war. Now, many of the people that were opposed to the war were simply opposed to Trump. They couldn't stand Trump. They weren't going any further to investigate anything about this war, whether we were right, whether we were wrong, whether we should have done it, whether we should have not have done it because of Trump's personality. They're against anything that he does. So I don't see any way that he turns the elections around, in such a short span of time. Thank heavens he can't run again for president. I just hope and pray that there is a decent Democrat that runs and a decent Republican that run so that we can get back to some say I was criticizing Trump, so my dog had to pop up, and he's a big Trump defender. He
Is
runs
he?
around,
Is
yeah,
he
he runs
MAGA?
around. He has his red hat on all the
Does
time.
he?
Oh yeah. Uh, but as I say, we just have to hold on and hope that Mr. Chaos and Confusion doesn't cause us too much trouble with the remaining time he has. And it's a
Right.
shame because the guy has got a terrific personality. He could charm a lot of people into doing a lot of good things. But I don't know if you mentioned it on the program. If you didn't, I will. I think that he has some emotional problems. Some people say that he has a superiority complex. I think that he might have an inferiority complex, and that's why he has to say many of the things that he says. And I'm not saying any more about this subject.
Well, I agree with you. I think that there are two ways to elevate yourself. You roll up your sleeves, you work hard, you do great things. The other way is you bring other people down so you artificially look like you've risen. If you can bring people who are higher than you down below you without making yourself better, sometimes that's an easier way. And I think that's what Trump does. I think he brings people down, he bullies them, he attacks them. All of his allies, if you look at from the first administration, he's completely isolated them, and he has a new crop of sycophants who just believe in him. And I think that that is part of the problem. But I mean, listen, we talk about this, and what's interesting is that there's no answer, there's no real solution to this problem except the election in
Right.
November. In the meantime, you and I are stuck arguing about nuances of conflicts that may or may not be, historically known or unknown. But we get distracted from the real problem. Trump is the problem. We need to focus on that. And also, the Democratic Party, I think, is a problem. I think that Trump is there because of their failings and their faltering. And that's one of the things that fuels his supporters. They see the Democrats, how terrible they were over the years, and they don't look at Trump. So we're between a rock and a hard place, Bill. I don't feel comfortable. I'm concerned about it. That even somebody like you and I, we're both two conservative Democrats who don't always see eye to eye on some of these issues, in part because I think we're driven to that conflict by these other people, by Trump and his circle. Listen, let's talk quickly about one of the things we wanted to talk about was the Israel and Lebanon conflict and these peace talks. Personally, I don't think that's gonna result in anything. I think this is just a show, a temporary thing that Trump is going to do, and I don't think it's going to get much, traction.
Well, let me say this to you. There's he's invited uh, the Israelis and
Mm,
he invited the people from Lebanon to sit down and discuss the problem, try to solve the problem. But they don't have Hezbollah there. And to me, Hezbollah is certainly part of the problem. There really should be a meeting between Hezbollah and Israel, I think, more than anything else. I think Lebanon, the government of Lebanon, has admitted for years that they could not control Hezbollah. Hezbollah ran the country more than the elected representatives have run the
right.
country. So, I mean, what are you going to accomplish by not having one of the main participants of the conflict not seated at the table? To me, this is just another distraction. Nothing is going to happen with it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your point, but again, I'm a critic of not Israel, but I am a critic of Israel's government, Netanyahu, who's been there over 20 years, and he has done more harm to the Middle East than anybody, including Hezbollah. And I think Hezbollah rose out of that problems that he's committed and that Ariel Sharon, his mentor, created. So it really is a deep problem. It can't be simplified by saying, we need to get Hezbollah and Israel into the room together. The problem is that they created each other and they're hated. What we do need, though,
Well, how do you
is
ever solve the problem? Can you
we
ever
need
solve the problem?
yes, there's only one way to do it, and there's only one right way to do it. The right way is you change the government in Lebanon and take control, and you change the government in Israel and take control. And there are a lot of Israelis and Jews who do not support Netanyahu. But Israel today is the result of these Russian Jews who fled the Soviet Union, who now control Israel, and their anger over everything is driving what's happening. So a lot of the Jewish people who are from Europe and these other areas, they're being pushed aside and they're leaving because of this conflict. So it's not a simple cut and dry thing, one side versus the other. And it would be great if Netanyahu, I'm going to tell you what, if Netanyahu were removed as prime minister and they had a new prime minister, chances of peace would jump 300 to 400%. You would
Well,
see a change in the Middle East, the Arab world, and even undermining Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas.
well,
So, but it's a tough thing.
my simple point was Trump's got this meeting at the White House with the people from Lebanon, the people from uh, Israel. But one of the biggest players is Hezbollah, and they're not going to have a seat at the table. So, what is it you are going to resolve with this meeting?
Nothing. I
Right.
agree. This is a showpiece for Trump to achieve some short-term gain. He wants the voters to think, "Hey, these my strategy of creating conflict produces results, but they're not long-term results. He'll get past the November election, he hopes, and then it could all explode and blow up and we could be at war again. But he only cares about that November election and his power base. That's what his priority is. Bill, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we can continue talking about this other fight with Pope Leo and President Trump. All right. We'll be right back, everybody, right after these messages. And welcome back, Bill. Pope Leo.
Yes, Pope
He
Leo.
wasn't elected by a democratic process, though, was he?
Oh, sure, he was elected by a democratic process. He was elected by all those cardinals that get the vote. That's a democratic process.
and
Let me
they
say
keep
one thing
saying,
right up front about Pope Leo. People keep saying that Pope Leo is the first American pope. He was born, he was raised, he went to school on what amounts to the south side of Chicago. But do you realize that he's been in South America for almost 45 years before he became pope? I really do not consider him the first American pope because he's really been immersed in the cultures of South America for 45 years. And I think he's more a pope representing the culture, the Catholic beliefs of those people in South America than he does of the Americans. I just like to get that out on the table because I keep hearing about how he's the first American pope, but I just don't think he reflects the values of American Catholics as much as he does the values of the Catholics in South America. Now I know that it's the one holy Roman Catholic Church, but in reality, there are different beliefs by different parts of the church. In most cases, not very significant, but there are certain beliefs that one section doesn't believe about another, but that's something for another day. I just like to establish the fact he's not a guy that was born and raised and lived his entire life in the United States of America. He's been gone for a long time.
well,
Okay.
isn't that the fundamental of the Catholic Church, that they were missionaries, that they took what was American, our religion, and not American, but Western religion, Christianity, and they said, "Hey, we got to bring it to South America." And they
Oh,
go to
sure.
South America, and then we tell them what the principles are, and they believe us. But you're basically, and again, I'm not criticizing you, Bill, but you're kind of suggesting that because Pope Leo spent all his time as a missionary doing the missionary work of the Catholic Church in South America, that he's not really an American. I think he is the fundamental of what an American should be. He took our beliefs to another people and wanted them to embrace them, the principles of
But he
fairness and
wound up
democracy.
embracing their beliefs.
Well, he recognizes that there's two sides to a story.
I have
You
no
know,
problem.
something that we no, but we do have a problem with that as
No, I don't have
Americans.
any
We
problem with that. I have a
You
problem
say that,
with
Bill.
people telling me that this guy is the first American pope. He's a South American individual.
Well, he spent most of his time in South America,
Yeah,
absolutely. But
two-thirds of his life.
I still think he is the, listen, I'm born here, even though I'm Middle Eastern and Arab. People go, "Oh, you're Palestinian." Okay, I am Palestinian, but I am an American, and I have a certain view. And you're Polish, but you're an American, and you have a certain view of that. But I think that he is the closest, if we want to say, I guess, for an agreement, to being an American of all the popes that we've seen, probably more so than any other pope.
Well, yes, he's
But
the only
they're
one
Western.
that was born here in this country and educated early on in this country who became a pope. Yes. But he
Yeah, but
follows very much in the tradition of his predecessor, Pope Francis, who was, from South America. And I think their philosophy about religion and about people are very, very similar. Certainly, their philosophy about immigrants, they are unhappy. Pope Francis and Pope Leo started out being unhappy about the United States of America because of the position we take in regards to illegal immigrants. Okay. They don't think that we should do that. They think that we should just take everybody in that can get across the Rio Grande. Okay. Well, I disagree with that. And I think they're
well,
wrong in expecting us to do it.
well, don't Christians say, "Hey, take the weak and the helpless and bring them in," and they include people that need help, and they assume that everybody that comes to this country is here for legitimate reasons because they want to have a better life. They don't address the fact that 20 or 30% of them are criminals who are gangbangers and drug dealers who are trying to profit and use a broken system to get into this country. But it's hard to argue against this principle of wanting to help the poor and those in need. But I agree with you. I mean, there's a line that needs to be drawn, a line defined by our laws. And this gets into immigration and illegal aliens and all that. And he's more sympathetic to those than I am, obviously. But I think we need to end that problem and treat people fairly and do a good job with people. But overall, I think he's a good person. I'm proud of the fact, and I'm not Catholic,
I'm not
although my
saying he
mother
isn't a
was.
good person.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that you said he was a bad person, but I'm saying, my mother was Catholic. I was raised Orthodox, like my father. But so I never really went to the Catholic Church, but my daughter was raised Catholic, and I would take her to the Catholic Church. So I have a mix of all these religions, but I'm proud of him standing up to unholy, unreligious, unchristian person like the devil, our president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. I
But Ray,
can't say.
he didn't stand up to the Ayatollah when the Ayatollah was murdering all his own citizens
Well,
back in January. Where was the Pope then?
well, he didn't stand up to Israel when Israel was murdering all these women and children in Gaza.
I
So
didn't
I
ask
mean,
you
you
to bring
can't.
up
You,
Israel.
I know,
I asked you
no,
to
but see, you're
answer the
trying to be.
question, where was
You
he
no,
in
you're trying to
January?
be selective. You're trying to be
I'm not
selective.
trying to be
He did
selective.
he did speak out against the killing of people, but he didn't do it the way you wanted it in a political way. You want to do it in a political way. You've said, "Hey, where was he on this issue?" But you don't want to talk about all these other issues that are just equivalent.
No,
So
you
I'm
brought up the other issues. I simply wanted to know where he was when the Ayatollah was murdering all his own citizens. He didn't say a word about that. But as
well,
soon
he
as
was
the United States of America gets involved in a war, he's telling us war is a terrible thing. We all agree war is a terrible thing.
Well, see, you say that the Ayatollah is murdering all his citizens. You mean just in the last 6 months, the past year? Because that is a lot of propaganda that he was murdering that they were murdering all their citizens. Did
Well,
they arrest protesters? Yes, they did. Did they have conflicts the way we do on the streets of Chicago when somebody does a protest and gets out of hand and we shoot somebody? We don't call them tyrants and stuff. So there's a little bit of a hypocrisy, Bill. I'm sorry
well,
that on
I
how
don't
we
see how you
treat
can
violence.
equate what happens sometimes on the streets of Chicago with the 25 or 30,000 Iranians that were murdered by their own government back in January.
And I don't see how you can close your eyes to the 78,000 Palestinians who were killed by the Israelis in
When was
Gaza.
this?
When was this? That's the problem. Since just from the occupation of Gaza over the past 2.5 years, yes, all
Oh,
those people, and
you
they
mean
keep killing them. Remember, we had a ceasefire in Gaza, right? That President Trump said was there, and the
this was
Israelis keep bombing them every week. But we don't want to read those stories anymore. We don't want them in our paper, and we don't want to talk about them because it's uncomfortable. It's our friend, our ally,
to quote
who's
a
the
great
tyrant.
American, can't we all just get along?
I agree with you. I would listen. Let's quote another great American, the people that wrote the Constitution of the United States. I believe in the rule of law. I believe that any act of violence is illegal, and people who are engaged in violence should be prosecuted and punished. Somehow we don't apply that across the board fairly and equally. That sometimes our friends, we cut them slack, and our enemies, we exaggerate it to the point of hate. So I think that's what's playing out in this conflict that we're seeing today. That this is a manipulation of the very principles that I think Pope Leo represents. He represents these principles of humanity and fairness in a way that's not political, and I think he's being attacked politically. And I think that's wrong. I would rather have Pope Leo lead this country than have Donald Trump lead this
But
country.
Pope Leo is the one that made it political by being selective. And when
Right.
he spoke out against people killing one another, he didn't speak out in January when it was taking place in Iran. He spoke out when the United States, from their perspective, was trying to liberate the Persians from a tyrannical government that they've been suffering under, not only for since the Ayatollah, but going all the way back to the Shah. Why did he choose to speak out against America? Why didn't he speak out against the Ayatollah? That's my only question to you.
I don't think he spoke out against America. I think he spoke out against Trump's wanton, policies to kill people. He murdered people, and without any rule of law, I guess it's okay when we go in and bomb a capitol and kill a president who is or isn't elected by the people over there. We're the judge and the jury. Suddenly, that's not democracy, and that's not
But,
law. And
but
he
the
did,
president,
and he did speak out, but you weren't listening. You
I
didn't
was
listen
listening.
to him when
I
he.
listened to him intently because I'm a
No,
good
you
citizen.
didn't. No, you didn't listen to him because he spoke out against, what was happening in Gaza. He spoke out against what was happening in other people, but nobody paid attention to him
Nothing was
because those
happening
were
in
not.
Gaza since
But
he was
let's see that
Pope.
you're wrong.
Pope Francis was the one that was, the Pope of the Catholic Church at that particular time.
That's not true. Pope Leo was happening in Gaza too. He spoke out on that. I think that we pick and choose what we want to listen to sometimes.
Well, he certainly should have spoken out about Gaza. If he was going to speak out against America, he certainly should have spoke out about Gaza. Okay,
He didn't speak out against America. What he spoke out against was injustice and crime. And those are the things that Trump is involved in right now. Those are the things that he's done. He's violated laws. And I think personally, I think he's a war criminal and he should be prosecuted. But we're not going to prosecute everybody that's a war criminal. We're only going to prosecute our enemies as war criminals. And our friends will do our best to defend them until, as we talked earlier about Lieutenant William Calley, he almost got away with what he did. And it took a while to finally prosecute him and bring him to justice. And there was such a backlash against that, too, when that happened. So, I mean, don't pretend like there isn't
but
this
he was
hypocrisy. Yes, he was. He was forced, and I think Trump will
brought.
be the same way.
Well, he was brought to trial. He was
I, I
convicted. He went to prison.
I think it was voices like Pope Leo's today that were back then that brought Calley to justice. And it wasn't just all of them, it was just Lieutenant Calley. We wouldn't prosecute our soldiers who shot and killed women and children.
They were
There
just
was a big debate about that.
they were
They were
just
told,
following orders.
yeah, isn't that what the Nazis said that they were
Yes, it
doing during
was.
World War II?
Exactly. Yes.
All right, Bill. But listen, the bottom line, I understand your point. You feel that he shouldn't engage in politics, but I don't believe it's politics. I think he's engaging in morality.
Well, I think the great thing about the country that we live in is that you and I can discuss this. And you have one position, I have another position. And
Yes.
fortunately, no one is above us to tell us to shut up on what we
Yes.
want to say or what we believe. That's the
Yes.
United States of America.
All right. And finally, listen, let's talk about Pete Hegseth, the
Oh,
Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, right? You want to
no,
say, do we want
Secretary of Defense. If you're going to change it to Secretary of War, it has to be done by the Congress of the United States. So let's
isn't that what Trump says? He calls it the Department of War.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Yes.
So it's like confusing, isn't it? He just changes stuff without going through the proper. But isn't it? Am I mistaken that in Trump's view, Hegseth is the Secretary of War
Correct.
over the? Okay, that I wasn't. I was just interpreting what fearless leader Boris Badenoff, who is in the White House, is telling us. But Hegseth was explaining, I don't know if you saw this, and it just became this huge story, how the U.S. Successfully recovered that one airman who was shot down in Iran. Remember the one that they got
Yeah.
one, they saved one, and they were looking for the second one. They
And they
went in
saved
there.
him too.
Yes, and then during a prayer, Hegseth decided to do a prayer at this event where he's telling people, what was going on. And what he did was he said he was reciting something from the Bible, Ezekiel 25:17. And it turns out what he was doing was reciting the dialogue from a movie called Pulp Fiction, where the criminals said something. They distorted this Ezekiel phrase and read it to the people that they then murdered. They killed in the thing. And it was like, how do you get a leader in a country that can so easily screw up? And genuinely, he was shocked when people said, "What are you talking about?" And he's looking at this is the Bible. It's not the Bible. Doesn't that raise some alarm bells? With who's leading our country and who's the head of the
Well, here's what
Department of State?
should really raise some alarm bells is when you nominate three conservative radio or TV talk show hosts to be the head of the FBI,
Right.
the assistant director of the FBI, and to be the secretary of defense. That should have concerned people right off the bat when you put three people like that into power. I heard all three of those individuals when they were private citizens, when they were doing their talk shows, talking about their conservative principles. I mean, these guys were over the top. I would have never considered them to be any people that could possibly be in government. And they wind up occupying three of the most important positions in the U.S. government. That's when people should have really gotten concerned.
Yes, listen, Bill, I agree with you 100% on that. And on that note, I think we should end the program at this point because we are right at the end.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
All right, I'm Ray Hanania.
Finally, after an hour, found something that we agree upon.
Well, we don't want to sit and have a program where we agree on things. We want to force the public who are listening to weigh both sides and come to their own conclusion because Absolutely. That's what the fundamental democracy is. I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is Two Guys on Politics. And if Ray and I are still talking next week, we'll be here to debate some new issues.
I'm sure we will be, Bill. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.